Hi, I'm John Atack, and this is you've become my good friend. We've been doing this for a while now. This is Joe Szimhart, who I must say I tremendously admire. There you are. I've slipped that in while you couldn't stop me. A man who spent a lot of time thinking about things and come to individual conclusions, that's the bit that I like, that where people have ideas that are new to me and have thought things through. I keep saying this now at the start of videos that we're here to teach people. We spent decades burrowing around trying to find information, but sadly, as yet, we don't know everything. And that means we're also here to learn from people. So we really invite questions and comments and corrections if we're wrong. So today, what should we talk about today, Joe? What's on your mind?
Well, I mentioned that money was on my mind. I heard a talk about our current state of affairs with cryptocurrency.
Oh.
And of course, people are investing in it, and wealthy people are investing in it. There's Melania Trump recently put up a NFT of her images of her watercolors of herself for sale. It's everywhere you look.
Didn't she get an Einstein visa to go into the United States based upon naked pictures of herself as an art form? Have I got that wrong?
Well,
that's how she got her US visa originally, Melania?
I'm not sure. You could be right about that. I mean, there's so much subterfuge and intrigue about that whole relationship of the Trumps that you could write books about it, and people have.
We moved from soft porn to soft watercolors. So
yes,
that's a good thing.
Yeah. It's still kind of voyeurism that she's selling when you think about it.
Unfungible.
It's just a little more sophisticated these days. That's all.
Yeah.
And what is a trophy wife but voyeuristic kind of an attachment, right? So I've been thinking about this because it goes back to my personal experience with Church Universal and Triumphant back in the 70s and 80s. They were very much into the idea that the economy was going to collapse and there was going to be some kind of an outbreak between the Soviets and the United States or the West. And in fact, they even went so far as to build this huge underground shelter in Montana in the late 1980s that could, sustain maybe 1,500 or 2,000 people for a year or two underground while this Holocaust or this apocalypse was going on, and then come out and survive, and then they would be among the chosen to rule the earth again. That kind of thing. The ascended masters would appear in their visible, tangible bodies, and we're going to get this thing right finally. The 1,000-year reign of Jesus, or the Reich, or whatever you want to call it, was going to happen.
Disney World.
Yeah. So one of the things they were doing was encouraging everyone back then to buy gold coins, cougarams, especially from South Africa, which were, 1 ounce of gold and very stable in terms of gold trading at the time. But they bought back then at around $500 an ounce, which was quite high, and it collapsed. The gold and silver market collapsed. Yep. And all these people were holding in their hands these $500 ounces of gold, or how many they bought, and it collapsed down into the $200s. And for decades, it never reached that high again. So it was actually a bad investment, advised by heavenly beings, called ascended masters, that didn't quite understand the economy, I guess.
Yeah, you can't trust those ascended masters. Let's face it.
Yeah, they're slippery beings. It depends who's channeling them, what they're going to say. And sometimes you wonder the same about Jesus, which church is channeling Jesus and what is he going to say today?
Yeah.
It almost depends what local church you go into and what preacher is spouting off about what Jesus wants us to do that day. I'm not saying that's bad in a way. I mean, it could be good because the idea of Jesus and some superior being helps elevate our consciousness perhaps into higher ethics, and so it can work. But normally it doesn't when it comes to absolutes and predicting the future.
It sounds as if the Church Universal and Triumphant had let the money changers get into the temple, which is a fundamentally wrong principle as far as Jesus was concerned.
Well, their idea of sharing everything in common was to take your money when you joined as a staff member and, fill their coffers with all kinds of schemes that didn't really help the entire group. So we'll just leave it at that.
Probably best.
So, I see a lot of parallels today in the last decade, at least, with this crypto idea and the idea of going back to the gold standard. The gold standard was touch and go and came and went. In the US in the late 1800s, it was a standard, and then they dropped it. Then they picked it up again, I think around the 20s, and for a while, and then they went back to fiat currency in the 30s. I think there was a huge rebellion against FDR from the conservative right back then. In fact, there was talk about assassinating him or at least doing an insurrection and putting him in jail. And a lot of it had to do with this idea that the gold was sort of the symbol of a stable America and a stable capitalism and all of that. And people were afraid of the New Deal as a kind of socialism back then. And we still have that. Yeah, we still have that. Yeah, go ahead.
There's historical precedent, which is the decline of the Roman Empire, that they shift from a gold standard to accept silver, and inflation takes place massively, and then they accept copper, and it's still retained in the old British currency, the pound, shillings, and pence, that meant gold, silver, and copper, and it created rampant inflation. But why would gold be valuable when Europeans started crossing over the plains to get to the California gold rush and disturbing the plains people? The Lakota and the Cheyenne couldn't understand why people wanted this soft metal that you couldn't make weapons from. What was the use of it? So
it was more for decoration and jewelry, but it wasn't necessarily Well, things got crazy during the gold rush, and most of the people that made money were the people selling shovels to the miners, and and other people with their saloons and brothels and whatever.
As well illustrated in Deadwood, the wonderful television series.
So, in the same sense, a lot of people, the critics, are wondering about cryptocurrency. Who's going to make money off of this, and why all the big investment and push? And obviously, the people with money are the ones that make money whenever something new comes around. Whether it's investment in Tesla and his electric cars or whatever. So the average person can make some money, but not a whole lot. And a lot of people lose money in these things because the market does swing up and down and is controlled somewhat by people that want to move the market in certain directions.
And as is said of all gambling, the house always wins.
Right. But I'm wondering what the house is right now. The house is, again, it's those people that have the power, that have the money, and it doesn't have to come from the right or left. It just comes from power. But every now and then you hear a story of somebody scraping by and suddenly making it big and all of that because of their new invention and their ability to worm their way to the top, so to speak. But this idea that there's kind of a linkage between some people that believe we should have the gold standard and investing in crypto, because it offers itself to a libertarian point of view, I think, where you get underneath or beyond the control of government and become a free person to manage your own money. And there's even people that are into the crypto game that have already figured out where to go, where to live in order to keep their crypto money from being taxed and controlled by U.S. government or whatever. So there's these offshore places that we're going to find like a crypto nation somewhere. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that's some of the talk that's going on.
And it certainly isn't it a really weird aspect of finance that we have these offshores. I think 2 US states are registered as offshores. We have, the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, Panama, where people can basically launder their money and escape taxation. And it's just incredible. You find super rich people, not mentioning, say, Donald Trump, for example, who, like all rich people, actually has made a loss every tax year somehow. He can't make money. Though I think there were 2 years where he earned as much as one of the cleaners working for him, but otherwise, this incredible ability to not give anything for the Commonwealth, and to keep their money in these places, and sort of going, why do the governments of the world still permit this at all? Given the corruption that it engenders.
Yeah, we all wonder that. What's really going on up there, and what kind of a shell game are they playing? I mean, you can go back to Scientology and its tax-free status. I mean, where did that come from? And obviously, some strings were pulled behind the scenes in order for that to happen. Because
and there's a very straightforward statement to be made about that the IRS proved conclusively in court the money inured to Ron Hubbard from Scientology, that it was flowing straight into his bank accounts. Now, I've talked to enough people over the years who were ferrying that money and paying that money across. There's no doubt it was happening. When he died, he left $648 million. And yet the tax bill that was levied in 1993 against Scientology was only $12 million. And you're going, well, even if you just take that 648, which they'd proved had inured to him, a percent, only taking 12 million of that, there was corruption in the IRS, no doubt. And, not having to provide a reason to the public about that, this is just wrong. We need to change our justice system so that there is accountability and transparency in all such dealings.
Yeah, and you get some people that, that are wealthy that might end up in house arrest or whatever for a year for cheating on taxes. Reverend Moon himself, for cheating on taxes, ended up in jail for 13 months, I think.
Yeah.
But he came out more powerful than he was when he went in prison, which tells you something.
And he managed to buy his way out of the rape conviction in Korea as well.
Yeah.
To prison for that one.
So, I can see why people on the right, and on the left are cynical about the elites. The idea that there's this cynicism toward that level of government, that it's really not honest and doesn't treat the elites the same way that the average working schlub is treated, with their wages are automatically taxed, and that somehow the system is two-faced when it comes to the people that have power and money and those that are wage slaves.
I mean, it's certainly part of the reason that FDR's New Deal program was attacked, because just as his distant cousin Theodore Roosevelt had put forward from the other political party, he was trying to bust trusts. He was trying to stop huge amounts of inherited money being passed down, and it was a failure. And the National Association of Manufacturing is said to have paid $2 million in the 1930s to annihilate the reputation of FDR. And with World War II, fundamentally, the New Deal came to an end. This idea of a real democracy, where merit would be rewarded, where everything would be pro-social and working towards the good of all society, was overthrown. And what we've seen ever since, and FDR himself came from the moneyed classes, no doubt, and came up through Tammany Hall, through corrupt politics. But we've just seen a plutocracy. We've seen this system that is based upon feeding the rich and making sure they're happy so they don't go somewhere else.
Yeah, but having said that, then there's elements of the New Deal which persist and are not, so there was some change that.
Oh, there was tremendous progress. Absolutely,
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And I think it was a remarkable time. And I think the Green New Deal people in the so-called left, whatever that is, of the current Democrat Party, are they give me hope. As long as we've still got the old moneyed guard, being paid for their appearances, it's the lobbying that Barack Obama on his first day as president tried to at least delay the period after which you could leave government and become a lobbyist. But lobbying is a bane on our system.
Well,
I think worse in the US than in Europe,
very much so. It's influence peddling. I mean, it's part of the whole sales game in capitalism. You have to exaggerate your product in order to sell it, and that exaggeration bleeds over into lies very easily.
Absolutely.
So yeah. But it's part of the game. It's it's the idea of the buyer beware. And I think the same problem comes in new religions and cults is, these social experiments that we call new religions or self-help groups are very rampant in the United States and throughout Europe to some extent. But it's buyer beware.
Yeah.
There's very, very little in the law that prevents people from getting you to go to a weekend workshop and spending $10,000 to improve yourself and wondering at the end of it, what the hell happened?
And people like Tony Robbins make incredible profits.
Yeah. And, what are they selling? They're really selling this idea, which I keep coming back to, of healing the wounded narcissist. The person believes that something can be fixed in them if something out there in society can be fixed, like, for instance, keeping immigrants from coming in is one way to help me become a better American. And the other way is that, internally, I can't seem to fix myself. I'm still waking up anxious. I still have trouble making decisions about things. And so you sign on to a life coach's workshop in order to fix those things. And then they get in your face and they do these dyads and they try to get you to confess your sins or your worst fears or whatever it is. And then you feel flushed out, like you've just emerged from the worst roller coaster that you've ever been on, and you survived. And suddenly you feel great. The little endorphins start bouncing around your head and you think you've accomplished something, but again, as the studies show, once you leave these self-help amusement parks that go on for a weekend or a week, life settles back into its little normal anxieties and whatever. And that wonderful breakthrough that you had suddenly doesn't apply because, in a sense, it was artificial. So I think that there's this continual need in human beings to their sense of being wounded from within and also from without to want to fix themselves. And so they do all kinds of strategies to do that. They take pills, they buy nice clothes, they go on vacations. We do all kinds of things in order to manage this anxiety we have. And I think that, going back to the money thing, this cryptocurrency looks like a new way to manage your anxiety about money. And that somehow you can make an investment and you're going to be cool for the rest of your life, like winning the lottery. As you brought up, it's a gamble, but people will buy into it in order to reduce their anxiety about their status in life. And I think that can be tapped by any of these things that come up, these grand schemes.
It's true.
So I don't know, we could end up, in a well-managed cryptocurrency universe. It could end up to be that, but I don't know how we're going to get there. Obviously the signs are that there isn't any more thievery and con artist stuff going on within the crypto world than there has been in any other kind of currency. we've always have counterfeits and thieves and people trying to influence people to buy something that isn't worth what they're selling it for. So, that continues. But I'm just wondering in times of uncertainty like we have with this pandemic right now, how this is going to play out. That's what I'm curious about, because I saw in a small way with the Church Universal and Triumphant how they managed to get people to, probably 99% voted Republican in the cult. They all believed in the gold standard. They all believed that the apocalypse was here, that the thing, so, has that kind of thinking now expanded to a much larger contingent around the globe because of the internet. And so, more people can be deluded into uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, history. I don't believe with Jean-Baptiste Vico that history is cyclical. But we do see these cycles of boom and bust. And I think a group of economists were given the Nobel Prize, I think it was in 2006, for proving that it would never happen again. And I don't think they've taken the money back from them yet, but it didn't last very long. But as we look to, say, the South Sea bubble in the 18th century, or the Mississippi scandal, that where the whole of the French currency under Louis XVI was put into this investment in Mississippi, set up by a guy called John Law, who was a Scotsman who was actually on the run from the English at that time as a highly wanted man. And he managed to get the ear of the king, and the whole French currency moved to be based on this thing, which was basically nothing. There was nothing there at all. And that collapse was certainly one of the major reasons for the French Revolution. And we see, the Panama Canal scandal, which Oscar Wilde wrote his play, An Ideal Husband, about that scandal, where again, shares are being sold in something that doesn't exist. And the cryptocurrency just has that kind of worrying sense to it, that it's a Wizard of Oz currency, that real and tangible things have value. Gold is already a substitution of value. Diamonds are a substitution of value, especially now you can make them in the lab. Land, arable land, not the swamp lands of Florida that were sold so enthusiastically in the early 20th century in the US. Arable land and land you can build on has a value, but that value too slews about all over the place, according to the confidence we have, according to the sense of certainty we have. Yeah. And so, in bad times, where confidence goes, inflation becomes rampant and the value of things drops. What would happen in a future society where the cryptocurrency, I mean, we already have pretty strange systems. Our Bank of England and the Federal Reserve System are virtually private. They're run by economists, not by governments. And that's a pretty odd thought. And they're based upon what? They're based upon a set of algorithms that derive from estimations of the market. I spent a week with a stockbroker. I've been hired to look into, there was some Scientologists who were basically buying up, they were green raiding. They were buying up companies to sell off their assets when, the book value of the company was actually higher than the share prices. And they bought into some gold mines. And this guy who had lost a gold mine at exactly this point you're talking about, the early 90s, where the price of gold had collapsed. So he hired me, and I went over to Reno, Nevada, and I spent a week with a stockbroker he'd hired. And I had this week saying, well, what are futures and commodities and pork bellies and these sort of things? What on earth is going on? And you realize that there's this amazing casino, selling short, selling long, that is actually running the economy of the world. It's nothing to do with politicians. They can influence it to some extent, but they're pretty much like, rain-making witch doctors trying to make the right things happen. And so we here had a banking crash that was predicted In the House of Parliament, 5 years before it happened, an MP called Vince Cable stood up and said there's going to be a banking crash because of the hedge funds and the subprime mortgages. And he was laughed at by the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown, who would later become Prime Minister. That led us then into austerity. And yet somehow we've managed to survive 2 years of COVID with almost no production. So somebody was lying to us somewhere about what we needed to do. And I imagine that farmers have been really strained by all of this, that they've had to keep working and producing something where much of what's actually going on in society is what David Graeber called bullshit jobs. You know, that so much of what's happening is just having a job for the sake of having a job and in not really adding value, you know, that wonderful surplus value that Marx was so keen on. So we have lots of accountants, we have lots of lawyers, you know, we have pen pushers and penny pushers.
You know, bringing that back to some more reality. When I traveled in India in 1981, at some points I had to get papers stamped and signed, you know, to move, and I had to stand in 3 lines. And one of the Sikh businessmen explained to me that, you know, there's so few real jobs in India to give to people that when a job opens up, they split it 3 ways, so that you have to do 3 things in order to do one thing. So this is how they manage the economy, was just to keep, like you said, just these useless jobs in a sense given to 3 people when one person could have done it.
Yeah. And I mean, in the 70s, when automation started coming in, I remember when the Fiat factory in Italy started to automate, and you're going, oh, great, now we can automate our factories and people have more leisure time. And instead, we got slavery in the special economic zones. You know, people like Nike and Amstrad going to Indonesia because there'd been ethnic cleansing on a grand scale and people would do as they were told. The same in Southeast Asia and, you know, the Pacific Rim. That these little slave colonies were created, which produce our goods. And nobody seemed to, I think the first major economist to say anything about it was in 1999. In the 80s, this process seemed so obvious to non-economists that, so I gave some talks at one of the local universities, Trent University, 20 years ago. And I was fascinated to see, it was at a fashion course and I was talking about color and painting. And I was fascinated to see that half of the students were Chinese 20 years ago, because no, they weren't going to let us go in, use their slaves and make all the money. They were going to start designing. They were going to set up their own businesses. And we've now seen the balance of the world tip, so that China in the next 10 years may easily be the major power in the world, which is a frightening prospect for us all, because, you know, as Churchill said, democracy is the worst system ever devised apart from all the others. And to have what I think of as the Chinese Fascist Party, it's got nothing to do with communism, with this much power now and with this much investment in all over the world. I think there are 135 countries out of 217 have now got the Chinese Belt and Road, or whatever it's called, project working. And the West has sat by bickering and invading the Middle East and messing around while this has been happening. And where would those cryptocurrencies be if there is a collapse in Western democracy? And where would gold be? What use is gold? I imagine there are far more metals that are...
I think China's ahead of the curve here, because as a government, an authoritarian government, they can manage and control how crypto is bought and sold in their system.
They are doing. Yeah.
And I think that this is what frightens the left, if you want to call them that, but people that fear a neo-fascism taking over the earth, is that we're almost destined to go in that direction in order to compete with what's going on in China. That people see that we need an authoritarian government to manage this very loose and crazy society, and you know, and promote anti-abortion laws and all of that other secondary stuff that goes with this perception that we're in control. You know, when we're not in control. Now the government's taking control of bodies and whatever, it's just the opposite of what's happening. But the tendency toward this authoritarian trend is almost inevitable in some people's eyes right now.
Yeah,
it goes on a teeter-totter, but it seems like we keep moving away from, like you said early on, the New Deal idea, and moving more toward authoritarianism.
And we've seen an incredible shift in society that Naomi Klein, that great champion of liberty, she points out that in 1980, when Reagan came to power, that the average chief executive officer earned about 40 times what a blue-collar worker would be earning. By 2000, that had gone up to 411 times.
Yeah.
And the idea of these huge payouts, like the hedge funds, that, of course, that money went somewhere. It went into the pockets of the hedge fund managers in bonuses. And it's kind of weird that nobody went and claimed that money back. That these people still own huge amounts of land and have contributed nothing but carnage and disaster to our culture. And I think there's something in that there's an idea among the coming back to the Plains Indians again, that must be on my mind this week, that their notion of the superior person is the person who gives the most away, and that's a part of culture that goes all the way up the Western.
Yeah, the potlatch.
Yeah, right through to the potlatch cultures, exactly, the Tlingit and the people of the Aleutian Islands, where it got a bit silly because they'd give everything away.
Yeah.
But in a buffalo hunt, the person who kills the most buffalo has to give them all away. And when I first encountered that idea about 20 years ago, it fascinated me. In Western culture, just as there's this belief that gold has a value, that there's this ingrained idea that the squirrel who is sitting on the hugest pile of nuts is the winner, while other squirrels are starving. And this notion of blue blood, which has become became Aryanism or some idea of superiority, which is an absolute nonsense. Our DNA shows that. I was reading a guy called Adam Henderson, who's a professor, who says we've actually, all of us, got Aboriginal genes, which I thought was a really surprising idea, as that's a population that separated tens of thousands of years ago. But we're all mongrels. We're all an intermixture of so many types. And we get this demand for purity, as Robert J. Lifton calls it, that fuels the neoconservative idea that there's some kind of superiority among some people. I mean, of course,
but you're bringing up a good point here. The average person in that milieu knows that they're not going to achieve this perfection, this ideal, or whatever. However, they then find so they're hero hungry. They need someone that mirrors that image.
Yeah.
And you get someone that pretends to be that great, or that God put in that place, and suddenly you have this relationship between the hero hungry person and the mirror hungry person. That I too can be like that king, but if I support the king, that's the bargain. And in any cult, when you look at it, I too can be like that cult leader if I follow the steps and support the cult leader. I can be that wonderful in the eyes of God, or that wonderful in terms of genius at developing a system of self-improvement like Hubbard was. There's this Wizard of Oz image of what is possible, and I think that's the devil's bargain, is to get people to believe that look, I'm great and I'm holy and I'm on the mountaintop. You can also get here, but you have to follow these steps. That's the devil's bargain.
And the other aspect of it is the joining the winning tribe. I read an incredible book by a guy called Brian Victoria called Zen at War. And I've been looking for this book for years because I knew that, Zazen meditation was being taught to all of the Japanese military, and where the promises made that mindfulness will lead to compassion. Mindfulness is Zazen. It's exactly the same technique, and it does not lead to compassion. Seeing that the myth that was taught from the 1890s onwards to the Japanese people was that the emperor was greater than the Buddha. He was the greatest leader Hirohito was the greatest leader who'd ever, well, and his predecessor, they were the greatest leaders who'd ever existed. They were gods incarnate. And
Right.
the Japanese people were the family of these, the superior of the golden-faced people. Let's get racist about this. And that therefore to follow the orders of the emperor was to be at one with nirvana, was to enter nirvana, was to have achieved the supreme enlightenment. And Zen masters were teaching this, including, of course, Daisetsu Suzuki, who was not a Zen master, who took Zen Buddhism to America and gave it to the hippies. And he was one of the worst offenders. The things he wrote in the 20s and 30s about, for example, the Nanjing massacre, where 150,000 civilians are slaughtered. And the general who commanded that was congratulated by the Zen master who had been training him.
Wow.
And so you get this complete perversion of, so there's, I can become as wonderful as you, though, of course, with L. Ron Hubbard, he always explained that you'd never be able to discover any of the technology that made people better because only he had that perception. But I can become a god by following the system like you, or I'm a member now of the winning tribe. We will ultimately rule the world, or we will rule in heaven, whatever. This, which is sold as Nazism, socialism, it's sold under just about every rubric you could think of as the way to be. The other point that gets me, and it's been hitting me repeatedly over the last few months, is this idea that there's an enemy inside us. And this wound that's being healed is because there's some invisible agent, an unconscious mind, an id, a superego, a body thetan, a demon, a dibuk, a gadon, whichever culture we go into, that we are not aware of, but that is aware of us. And I think this is the biggest piece of nonsense that's been so repeatedly sold. Because while there are unconscious and subconscious processes, there's not a Mr. Hyde waiting in there to emerge and take over. And I think that fear is put into people through, whether it's through psychoanalysis or through Scientology or the Church Universal and Triumphant, that there's an enemy within, and that the liberation from that, the point where you kind of going, yeah, I'm wounded. Everybody's wounded. Everybody's been traumatized. Yeah. We were all born at some point, which must have been pretty gruesome, but thankfully I don't remember it. And I'm not going to, go through primal therapy to try and remember it. But we can accommodate those wounds. And I disagree with the Buddhist idea that everything is suffering. Everything will lead ultimately to death. I accept that. But there is also, as I keep talking recently about the vinegar tasters, the Lao Tzu, Confucius, and the Buddha all standing at the vinegar butt with Confucius going, ugh, and the Buddha serenely smiling at the taste of the vinegar, and Lao Tzu enjoying the taste of the vinegar. I see those possibilities. So the enemy within, and everything is suffering, and you've got to follow the leader, and all of this stuff. To be yourself, to be individual, to grow up, to take responsibility for what you do and what you say is a tremendous liberation. It is growing up is a good thing, whereas this idea of some enlightenment where nothing will ever harm you, you'll never have to feel bad again, is just adolescent, frankly.
Mm-hmm. I think the whole enlightenment movement that that at least in my experience started back in the 60s, but goes way back, is a fraud. If you're an asshole before you get enlightened, you'll just be a bigger asshole after you've been enlightened. Basically that's what I see it coming down to. So it comes down to behavior in the common, ordinary sense. What do you do after you get enlightened? Is it
you help people? And all of the Zen sects, all of the Rinzai, Soto, Obaku sects have had to apologize because their enlightened masters were teaching torturers and slaughterers how to do their work, with this nonsensical idea, you are empty and your enemy is empty, and therefore it doesn't matter that you know, there's a point in the book where, speaking of the training of Japanese troops, I think before the Second World War, after the invasion of Manchuria, young Japanese men were given rifles with bayonets on and aimed at Chinese men who were tied to trees and told to bayonet them to death. And it's heartening that a couple of them refused to do it.
Yeah.
But not very many.
Right.
And that this was being directed by enlightened masters, people who in the Zen tradition had 3 times received a transmission from a master to say that they were enlightened.
Yeah, you almost think back to the Milgram experiments, even though some of it's been debunked, but a lot of it's true, that people will bend to an authority-looking figure, even if it goes against their personal values, because they think, well, maybe I'm wrong and they're right.
I think, yeah, I mean, I hesitate on the idea that Milgram's been debunked, actually. Because,
well, a little bit of it. I mean, not altogether. It's you know.
He was a lot more thorough than his critics say.
Yeah, I think you're correct.
He did 17 sets of experiments. And after Milgram, because the debunking is largely that ethically he shouldn't have done those things because it might have been traumatic.
Yeah, they're called impermissible experiments.
Yeah, but there was one of the experiments was done because it was said, well, look, there's this thing that it was an actor. Nobody was actually being given an electric shock.
Yeah.
Maybe people instinctively knew that. And once it was done using actual dogs, using puppies that were electrocuted, and about the same amount of people followed it. So, you know, there's a hell of a movement at the moment to try and debunk Milgram, Zimbardo. I have to accept them as Afar Sharif's experiment is not conclusive. That, you know, if he'd failed that time, he'd have been sent back to Iran as a communist and executed by the Shah. So he did have some skin in the game, but I still think his idea was correct. Though they did provoke, what is it, the rattlers and the eagles to attack each other. That's not admitted and should have been. But what he achieved at the end of the experiment, where he got the kids to work together, having been enemies, I don't think enough has been made of that. That in just a couple of days you can bring opposing forces together with a common cause. But yes, the dynamics of, you know, human behavior, where so many people, you know, what are you going to do? That all around are losing theirs. Are you going to keep your head?
It's, you know, you bring up the thought of in World War I in the trenches, the French and the English or Germans are fighting, and both sides had the Little Flower, the book, you know, as to protect them, the Saint Teresa books, and you know, and when there was a ceasefire, they both got out of the trenches. They went and were playing cards with each other, you know, the enemies.
Well, you had the Christmas ceasefire of 1914, where
and they
Saxon and British troops played football together. The Prussians didn't. But and after that, the immediate thing was that the War Office in Britain banned the possession of a camera by any soldier in the front line, because there had been all of these photographs of fraternization. It took months to settle down. And
which gives you an idea, you know, that most human beings don't want to behave that way, but they do because of submission to some ideal, to some authority figure, and perhaps to protect their from being sent to jail or having their family sent to jail for not performing on the battlefield.
The British and French troops and possibly all the others, if you did not go up when the whistle went, if you didn't go into no man's land, you'd be shot.
It's called treason. It's called treason. So that's you know, and we wonder, this is what I think frightens people at the base, whether they're in QAnon or some far left thing. They think that this authoritarian control over their lives has gotten too far, and they want to stop it. And you know, so there's all these strategies to define what is authoritarian control from the left and the right.
Another authoritarian control.
Yes, in order to defeat the first one, But if you don't have a good plan for government after you've defeated what you think was, you end up with some mess like they did in the French Revolution for a while.
Or Iraq.
Or Iraq, yeah. So we are in dangerous times, and maybe the imperfect government we have, and this is the wisdom, I think, is better to work with and to continue to tweak and improve than try to wash it all away and start anew with a more perfect union, which is a myth. But because
we need to make better what we have. And if you end up in a country that's being run by Duterte or Bolsonaro or Modi, maybe it's necessary to take stronger action to bring change, because these systems will not give, Putin's not, and Xi are not going to give up what they have. Having said that, the idea of the Chinese or the Russians, the reality is that China has something like 700 riots a week. They do not have, it's not like North Korea where they've created a kind of robot state almost.
Well, China has done this capitalist experiment, and it's going quite well in a way for them. They and so is India in a way. So
going as well for India, but things don't tend to go too well for India.
No, India is
also
animal.
having problems. Yeah, the other three new superpowers.
So obviously the North Korean model is one of the worst, but because there's a lot of corruption up top, they do a lot of black market dealing with whatever they're selling in order to keep the government rich, the governing body rich.
And there's starvation at the base level. So
it's a horrible system, but they have a large standing army, which is intriguing to other authoritarian. If they can get North Korea on their side, then they have a plus. That's the way they look at it.
And in terms of our own systems, I think the American system, the electoral college system, for example, has been begging for reform for at least a century now. And it is so awful. Once something has been set in stone, once something has become the law, look at the laws on cannabis, which all of them come from the fear of miscegenation, the fear of interbreeding between the races. That's why Canada in 1924, because of a single book called The Black Candle, a novel, it said that white women would have sex with black men if they smoked cannabis. And you go, well, Canada doesn't seem to care about that anymore, thankfully, and they've legalized. But we have this demonization of certain concepts that bind society together and then start to split society. In this country, we certainly have, I think the Home Office 30 years ago said there were 2 million cannabis users. So you've criminalized a whole section of your population. I think moving the law away from moralizing and towards evidence-based ideas and towards a simple idea, which is the protection of society. It's quite legal to commit suicide. So if you want to take a drug and that's going to harm you, that's your problem, within that moral set. If you're going to do something that's going to harm other people, then that is for the law to deal with. And unfortunately, the system has been twisted. And I think in the US, with the Supreme Court where it is at the moment, this idea that you can nominate people of your view rather than people who are great jurists. That's a dreadful idea. The idea of separating the legislature from the executive, from the judiciary, what an excellent idea. But in practice, it's not working. And it's time to refine that and make measures that I keep talking about virtual Taiwan, because this is a really baffling problem for me from my teens onward. How do you have an equitable democratic system? We have elective dictatorships. Every few years, we elect these people and they're the dictators. They decide what to do. This small, 625 people in this country make the law. They determine what's going to happen. And they're not coming back to their constituency. But on the other hand, if you have a plebiscite, a referendum for everything, you end up with things like Brexit, which has completely messed our economy up. And was based upon lies, damned lies and statistics, little else. So there's got to be some balance. In virtual Taiwan, the idea was that the world's first transgender government minister put in this thing saying, whenever there's a contentious issue that divides the population, we'll discuss it online. And the question they brought up, and I've spoken about this often, is electric scooters. Half the population didn't want them, half did. And so they went online and talked about, well, how could we modify this? So they said, well, if they wear protective gear when they're riding them, if there's a speed limit, if there are any particular places where they can ride them, and they got a super majority, they're actually able to vote this in. And I think we need to make that change. You know, reading Edward Bernays, the great advisor to the US government, the double nephew of Freud, one of the inventors of propaganda, who, when he saw Nazi Germany, said, oh, they're doing the stuff that I recommended in my book. You know, it's not invented by Goebbels, it's invented by an American advertising man.
Yeah.
And this idea, he said, in the 1920s, so nearly 100 years ago, that of course we want democracy, but the people aren't educated enough yet to be able to make decisions, so we must manipulate them through sex and what have you. It's 100 years later. We've had time for the education, but the education we need is not in geography or physics. It's in relationship. It's in responsibility. It's in, you know, how to care for the society. And I'm optimistic because I think we do, people like, just because of the bizarre lives we led and the strange things we did, people like you and I have actually a toolbox that can be used to help people to make up their own minds and to feel capable, you know, and competent to.
Well, I think there's more to it, because we also have to protect the limited individual, you know, from scam artists and
absolutely
people that can sway how they decide, because we can't be experts about everything. We have to learn to trust the experts.
But I think
the experts have to be
also,
the experts have to be vetted. They have to be vetted somehow, that they know what they're doing in politics and in the economy and in technology or whatever. And I think that's the big battle that's going on. But you know, the problem, I think, getting back to cryptocurrency is the influence game. You know, what does it mean? What is it going to mean for you in the future? And who's winning this battle of influence? And you know, there's got to be some stable geniuses that understand this and that can explain it. You know, I'm sure there are people out there right now, but they're not being heard all around. You know, this is, quote, an experiment that could go badly, but it also could be managed and could go well. You know, so I think that's where we are right now with it.
Yeah, I think there's a way to go forward. I'll still underline the thought that I think that helping people to think for themselves is the significant element. I agree with you. That
no, I agree. I think you have to raise the bottom. You've got to keep doing that, because that puts people that are in positions of power to pay more attention to reality, you know, rather than just say, well, they don't understand, they can't make a decision, so we'll make a decision for them. You know, that's where the problem is.
The possibility of electing people who, you know, can be tested against the Hare psychopathy checklist revised, and we can weed out some of the narcissists and Machiavellians and psychopaths.
Yeah, I think our good friend Steve Hassan in his PhD was trying to argue for a way for government to manage influence games, you know, to make some laws that help the general population to be able to trust what they're buying and not allow for authoritarian type of rule by psychopaths or whatever to manage people's lives. You know, in a sense, I think he's spitting in the wind, but it's a good effort, you know, that he made there, because you know, you're dealing with forces that are very old and powerful within the human being as well as within history, of how we just sort of collapse into these horrible situations like war and depression, you know, in terms of the economy. it's you know, I can understand why people are unsettled. So
and how we live in disturbing and conflicting times.
yeah.
Still, this has been fascinating as ever.
Yeah, I've got to take my dog out. She's barking, and it's been good. Thanks talking about this. It's a good topic. I think it's never ending, but I appreciate your incredible memory for detail and history, because I read things and I lose them, but you seem to retain quite a bit.
Yeah, I can't claim any credit for that. You know,
Well,
the only thing I would say is that I don't discourage my own memory. And I think that, you know, we've seen that in authoritarian groups, that they tell you that what you believe is wrong, you know, ideology over experience, doctrine over person, as Lifton put it. And I trust my memory, and when it's wrong, I admit it. So if I give a wrong piece of information, and you know, which is why I always ask for people to put corrections in, and I have been corrected and I have been wrong all the way, but I do say things with tremendous authority, and I think that matters. So anyway, it's been fantastic, Joe. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, John. Take care of yourself.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.